Good morning, and can I welcome members to the 6th meeting of the Education and Culture Committee in 2014, and can I remind all those present to ensure that all electronic devices are switched off because they interfere with the broadcasting system, as we'll remember from last week, Colin. So therefore our first item today is to invite Mary Scanlon to declare any relevant interests. Mary, have you any relevant registrable interests to declare?
Yes, I do. This is probably the only committee in the Parliament that I do have a registrable interest. I started teaching further education light class in 1973, 41 years ago, and for the 20 years before coming into this Parliament in 1999, I was a part-time and full-time lecturer in further and higher education in economics and business studies. I have a small pension which I have declared in my register of interests. I hope that's enough.
Thank you very much, Mary, for that, and welcome to the committee. Our second item is to decide whether to take agenda items 4 and 5 in private at this and any future meetings. Are members agreed? That's agreed. Thank you very much. Now we move on to our substantive item on the agenda. Our third item is to take evidence on STS Career Support Service, known as My World of Work. And can I welcome to the committee this morning James Corrie and Kate Lynch from Unison Scotland, Dr Cathy Howison and Sheila Semple from the University of Edinburgh, and Danny Logue and Rob Doyle from Skills Development Scotland. Good morning to you all. Thank you for your attendance today and, of course, for your written submissions, which have been very helpful. Dr Howison and Sheila Semple have conducted some research on this topic, and in their written evidence have helpfully highlighted 8 topics arising from the research. Before I move on to my question, though, can I just say to all 6 members on the panel this morning that all 6 of you don't need to answer every question, and certainly both of you from each organisation don't have to answer each question, just so that we get through as much as we can today. But now that you've both had an opportunity to look at the other written evidence that's been submitted, particularly by STS, I just wondered whether either of you have any comments to make on the 8 topics that you submitted to us, which you thought were of relevant areas of interest for discussion.
I think it doesn't actually change the various 8 implications that we've drawn. The SDS submission doesn't actually address those points, in particular issues to do with the need for hard evidence as opposed to opinion, since much of the SDS submission refers to client evaluation, which is about opinion as opposed to hard evidence of impact. It doesn't address issues to do with the criteria for seeing a careers advisor. And indeed, there are a number of places in the SDS submission where our findings are misinterpreted or misrepresented. I mean, I can give examples of that if required. And generally, I would just say that, we do feel that this research evidence, other research evidence, evidence from the field, really has the potential to move. We have the potential in Scotland, the basis in Scotland for world-class careers provision. But that potential will only be realised if the variety of evidence about what's happening in practice is taken on board.
Thank you much. Having heard that, SDS, what is your view of some of the comments that Dr Howison has just made?
Well, yeah, thanks, and thanks for Dr Howison's comments. First of all, at SDS, we have said in our submission, and we would say again today, that we welcome the research from both our colleagues sitting here today. In fact, it very much directly reflects our experiences and the feedback we've had to date from the customers that we've spoken to in terms of young people who are in school, young people who have left school, head teachers, etc. And also reinforces our approach, which is a multi-channel approach in how we deliver our careers information, advice and guidance services. That is the web service known as My World of Work, but also the importance of face-to-face services that young people and adults can actually access. And we also have our customer contact centre as well. So again, it does reflect the importance of that, and that's what's delivered through our blended approach in SDS.
Okay, thank you very much for that. Just some general points I wanted to get on the record first, but I'm going to move on to questions from members now. So if members would indicate when they want to come in, but I'm going to start with Jane Baxter.
Thanks, Convener. Morning, everybody. I'm interested in how agencies engage with young people and how agencies make sure that they're reaching out to young people who perhaps most need those services. And it's clear from reading the paperwork that's been supplied this morning that it's almost like everyone's trying very hard but could do better. There are obviously gaps in that engagement, and there are sectors of school pupils that we need to try harder to reach out to. And I'm wondering what steps SDS are taking to make sure that better engagement is actually in place on the ground.
Thank you. Thanks for the question. A couple of things. First of all, I want to say that I mentioned earlier about the evaluation, the feedback we've taken from young people in school. In fact, we've got 30,000 questionnaires back from young people in school and young people who have left school about their view and understanding of the services and how they can access our services. In fact, 89% of the S4 students we talked to actually knew and understood how they could actually access our services within schools. The second issue to mention is a rapidly changing behaviours and expectations of young people and how they access services, particularly face-to-face. It's very, very important. But equally, the growth of technologies in terms of, in our case, the web service that we provide through My World of Work. And I'd want to make a distinction between a web service, because it's an interactive service that we provide rather than a website that we had in previous days. The other issue is about, a key issue for us in working with young people is about the important role that influencers have in working with young people, the important role in terms of working with teachers in schools and how we capacity build and support teachers, and how we work with parents and industry as well about to reflect how they can help. The other issue was about young people accessing our services is there is a key role for our staff working in schools, but there's also a very, very important role for teachers and parents in supporting them, and that's why through the services we've developed through My World of Work, and particularly around Partner Zone, which we'll maybe come back to later on. And the key issue for there is about how do we make sure that young people acquire the career management skills that we're trying to develop along with teachers in schools. And that's about how they develop their own particular career management skills and how it fits very much in with Curriculum for Excellence and the core skills that are there as well. Another important point for young people accessing our services is something we call the skills planning model. What we're looking at there are what are the current and future needs of the labour market and how young people can actually access our services and find out more of what's available. So we have introduced a skills planning model with industry and staff to support teachers, parents and young people in terms of those particular needs. And the last 2 points I think it's worth mentioning in terms of your question is around the universal access that young people in schools and post-school actually have to our services. We have a universal service that anybody can access, whether it's face-to-face, whether it's My World of Work or whatever. And we also have a targeted services in there in terms of how we work with schools to identify young people who are most at risk in terms of not securing a positive destination. And that underpins my opening comment earlier on when I talked about the blended channel approach, that face-to-face is the cornerstone of what we do and what we offer young people, but as is our web service, My World of Work, and also the contact service we have as well.
Just briefly, Convener. Thank you. You talked a lot about access and people having access to systems, but you didn't mention much about effectiveness or whether that access actually was of any benefit to them. Do you do any work to evaluate how beneficial people find having that access? Does it actually get them where they want to go?
Yeah, well, there's been a couple of surveys we've done fairly recently. We did a school leaver survey last year in terms of young people who had left school last year in relation to their particular findings there. And 70% of those who'd actually left school and took part in that survey had actually accessed the face-to-face services there as well. We also have just recently undertaken 30,000 feedbacks from students in schools and post-school about how they've actually found the services we provided through the group work services what we've done. And the other issue for us is around the important work we do about school leaver destinations. Last year we had the highest positive destination record in history. It was 91.4% last year, an improvement from the year before. The ongoing work we do in terms of our own research and evaluation plan, we have a commitment over the next 3 years about, back to the point that was mentioned earlier on, about a research and evaluation programme for young people in schools, how they found their services, whether it's done from the group work sessions they have. And the final point to mention is we're working very closely with Education Scotland now in relation to something called our business excellence approach. And that's about working with Education Scotland, with teachers and pupils and parents as well, to understand the impact the services that we provide and getting direct feedback from them, and using Education Scotland working very closely with us to undertake that.
Okay.
Can I just follow that up? I mean, I want to push you on this, because Jane was quite right in asking this question about the difference between you and of course Dr Howson mentioned it earlier, accessing something, enjoying something, having positive feedback about something and its effectiveness. I mean, if I go out for a day and have a great day out, you know, at a training course, it doesn't mean it was a particularly effective training course. I may have had a great day, but it doesn't tell you anything about whether or not that training course actually helped me in learning new skills. So can you explain to us a little bit more about how you understand the difference between the impact that your work makes on young people and the fact that there's positive feedback, because the two things aren't necessarily the same thing.
No, they're not. And the model that we've introduced and the skills, the service delivery model we've now introduced, it's now 2 years it's being in school. And what we've done in terms of phase 1 to that evaluation is getting direct feedback from young people and from head teachers and other partners about what they've experienced in terms of the satisfaction of the service we have in school. The next stage we're taking forward is around looking at the whole impact issues, and that's part that I mentioned earlier about the 3-year research and evaluation programme. We've got about how do you start to measure the impact of what we are doing. So to date, it's very much about taking direct feedback from clients of all ages, parents, etc., and teachers. What we've then got to look at is then further research into the impact of that.
Liam MacArthur.
Maybe just follow that up, convener. I was listening with interest to what Dr. Howson was saying at the start about hard evidence. Now, I think to many people, a series of questionnaires covering 30,000 people will give you some form of quantitative feedback on how a service is performing, but not necessarily the qualitative impact. And I'd be interested to know how you think STS might better bridge that gap that clearly you believe is there. And I think one of the areas that wasn't mentioned there by Mr. Logan in his summary of the work that's done was feedback from members of staff. And I think if for no other reason, then it allows our Unison colleagues an opportunity to voice their opinions on this. It would be helpful to know what the feedback through staff is in terms of the qualitative effect that these changes within SDS have had.
Can we start with Unison then?
Thanks very much. I think the issue here is one of, how do we know that we're ensuring that young people get the right support that is required? Currently in the organisation we have a system where there's a risk matrix, and that risk matrix identifies the kind of blended service of the level of support that young people require. Now, our members have some concerns about that some young people might fall through the net in terms of that level of support. For example, minimum risk customers are viewed as young people that have been capable of managing their own careers and finding an opportunity by confidently accessing the My World of Work web services. But some of our members' views on that, and I can quote one or two of them, they say, our members are concerned that we might miss out on a large group of minimum risk pupils who are not advised about the services of a careers advisor, what they can provide, and therefore do not know the benefit of requesting a careers guidance interview. And that's one of the nubs of some of the recommendations from the academics, that, for example, there is no research that says the more cleverer you are, the less you need to see a careers advisor, or the better a career planner you have. Some of us, maybe not so long ago, remember the decision we were making. We might have sons and daughters that are making those decisions just now. There are many complex decisions to be made, and assumptions made that because you're more academic, that perhaps you don't need that crucial face-to-face intervention would be of concern to careers guidance professionals. And that's why we recommend some of the recommendations, for example, that suggest that young people who are also vocationally uncommitted or vocationally unsure, irrespective of their academic prowess, should have the opportunity to access that face-to-face advice and guidance. But again, to quote a pupil in the research, they said, I didn't even know my school had a careers advisor till about a week ago, and we aren't told about what he or she can do for us, so I'm reluctant to go. So ultimately, why would you feel the merits of going to see a careers advisor if you don't actually know the role they can perform and the support they can offer? And I think that should be a concern for all of us in terms of the profile of the school careers advisor in a school setting.
I had to say, I was going to come on to the issue that I think is flagged up in the advice from Dr. Howson and Dr. Semple in relation to the pupils that are missing out on careers information, advice and guidance, because it does appear to go beyond, despite the universal provision and the targeted aspect of the provision, it does seem to encompass a fairly broad range of young people. Those in the lowest attaining group are most likely to miss out, it suggests. Girls were less likely to have access to career support than boys. And then I think the point that you were making, Mr Corrie, that unfocused pupils are not currently given any priority within SDS policy, and that could reflect those, as you say, of a wide range of academic abilities. I'm just wondering whether, from the work you've done, whether you would see that there is a way in which, given what Mr Logue said about both a universal provision and a targeted approach, how that approach, that blended approach, can be more effective in preventing people just falling through the gap because they don't appear to be in the right category, in the right school, or whatever it may be.
I mean, we would very much support the idea of a blended service because not everyone needs the same thing, but it's about identification of need. And I think SDS, it would be helpful if SDS could develop a better system for identifying need. And James has said about the criteria that's used. So I think on the one hand, the criteria needs to be extended to include career guidance needs, so the extent of pupils' career thinking. And there has to be a mechanism to identify that to enable then provision to be targeted at those clients as well. But there's clearly something else that's required because, looking at the figures for the percentage who don't get any careers information, advice and guidance, and I did take on board the what SDS said in their submission, that our original figures hadn't included introductory talks or introductory sessions. So I've extended the analysis, and in fact it makes very little difference. Basically about 2 percentage points, so that the overall figure goes from 17% with no advice, guidance and so on, down to 15. But when you look at it by attainment, you've still got, with the revised figures, 20% of low-attaining young people receiving no inputs. So there's something, although, and I think one has to acknowledge the efforts both SDS and schools have put in to identify young people at risk, it is still not sufficient.
Is it your experience? I mean, you talk about identification processes not necessarily being as effective as they might, but is there not perhaps an issue that if one is overly reliant on a process and removes the level of sort of autonomy of the individuals within the career service to act with common sense and responding to circumstances as they see them, that we're always going to have that problem with a certain cohort falling between the...
Yeah, I mean, I think you raise a really important point about the role of professional judgment. And I think in efforts to try and get at least a minimum standard of provision, I think the careers advisors' professional judgment and ability to exercise their professional judgment and use their professional expertise has perhaps been unfortunately somewhat curtailed. And also relating to the point James made about if the clients are to exercise their ability to ask, to seek help, they need to be very clear about what help is available and how to access it. And certainly our research found that young people were very confused. I mean, Sheila can say more about this, but compared to the young people we had researched in 2009, the level of uncertainty and confusion about the role of a careers advisor was greater in 2013.
And the result of that shows up when you ask young people the extent to which they expect to speak to a careers advisor in the future. And that seems to be not because they have particular great faith in the other parts of provision, but they actually do not understand why they might do so. And that also feeds back into what your evaluation strategy is. If you then go, and now it's good to do something over a 3-year period, but if you're asking young people, did the service meet your expectations, did it help you in the way you wanted, if you don't know what to expect or what might have been there, then you may well say, yes, it was great, but another measure might show that, well, it doesn't actually meet the needs of young people. Now, we know that actually targeting and actually getting to the right people is a very, very tricky task. It's not an easy thing to do. But we do believe, just to recap, there's a flaw in the matrix itself. It misses out on a key group that a professional career guidance organisation should be looking at and supporting. And that, I think, would be of interest to the committee, because for young people heading for higher education, it's a big decision for them. Nobody can afford dropout. We know there's evidence that involvement in career guidance does help to reduce the amount of dropout from different kinds of opportunities. We as a country can't afford that. So there's getting the right targeting, and then there's actually trying to make it happen and knowing that you can't ever quite get it right. So underneath that, you need to have this understanding that there is a person who can help you and who will be available. Now, I was particularly surprised, having worked in the same 3 schools one time. We had 14 schools the second time, but 3 we worked in intensively again, the same 3, that they really did not understand, as Cathy has said, how to speak to a careers advisor or what a careers advisor was. And that was despite the fact that all 3 schools had, and this is a good thing, had increased allocation of a careers advisor into the school. So there are some things that are just not quite working in the interests of young people.
Interested in Unison and indeed STS's perspective on this issue about professional judgment and the extent to which it may be constrained at the moment, and probably more importantly, whether there are ways in which it can be extended in order to capture some of what we've just heard is not being captured at the moment.
When we are in schools now, we do talks, CMS talks and My World of Work talks. At the end of those talks, we do tell the young people, and those talks are delivered to everybody. At the end of those talks, there is a slide which says you can access a skills development advisor through the clinics, but we don't in those talks tell them what they would expect if they see a skill or a careers advisor. I think they would maybe understand more if you spoke about a careers advisor in school and tell them about the things that they could benefit from speaking to a careers advisor, looking at their skills, looking at their strengths individually, not just about giving information, about helping them explore their options. So we don't actually tell them that we can do that. We tell them, if you want to see a skills development advisor, come and drop into the clinic. It doesn't actually give them that information of why they might want to do that. So I think that might be one of the problems that in the past, I mean, I've worked in schools for quite a lot of time, but in the past we used to go around class, we would tell them a lot of information, really encourage them to come and see us. Now I think it's one slide, so the minimum risk pupils maybe wouldn't understand really why they would want to come and see us.
Is there an extent to which, sorry, I'll bring SDS in a second, is there an extent to which, rather than adults explaining to young people what's available, whether you, exemplars are using kind of peer support in explaining the benefits perhaps that they've got out of that process in a way that may seem more relevant and accessible to young people?
That happens informally. You know, you do get a young person will come and say, "Oh, I've come to see you because my friend was here." I mean, that does happen quite informally, but not on a sort of formal basis.
A few members waiting to come in.
Thanks, Mr McCarthy. Just to start off with the role model, we've actually got an ambassadors programme now for My World of Work. We're identifying champions, young people themselves within schools, to help us get the messages over to young people about the value of My World of Work and how you can use it. So that particular ambassador programme just kicking off. A couple of things. First of all, we talked about targeted services, and I've been in the career service in its various forms for 30 years this year. And there's never been an example in the past where everybody got a careers advisor's interview in the past. We had targeted and universal services. That's always been in offer. So not everyone got needed a careers guidance interview, and that's going back 30 years. So very much about targeting is important. The issue about the risk matrix is in terms of the first year we introduced it, We felt it was too cumbersome in terms of how we were identifying young people. And then last year, what we did, we introduced a system where the career coach in the school would work with the school to identify and work with who do we need to target our resources within school to make it more flexible. And that was taken on account of feedback from teachers. So we did that. The other issue that we've built into the risk matrix is an issue about uncertainty and lack of vocational maturity to identify as one of the factors in how young people can be identified within the risk matrix. So that's in there. I checked it yesterday to make sure it was there, and it's definitely, and it's there. We actually have seen more pupils this year so far than we did last year, and there are more coaches in schools than we had 2 years ago. So we're putting this, it was mentioned earlier on by Sheila, there are more staff we're actually having working within schools. The other issue for us in terms of feedback, we've just undertaken, as Kate just mentioned there, a whole series of group work sessions right across all the schools. And one of the issues we had, and I mentioned earlier on, and certainly in terms of the S4 pupils, 89% of the feedback we got from those particular groups knew how to access SDS services within schools. The clinic session that Katie talked about, that's a lunchtime facility that young people can drop in. But if a young people is a minimum risk, i.e. someone who looks as if they're sorted because of the number of hires, they can still have a face-to-face interview with a career coach in schools. They always have been able to do that. And they will continue to be able to do that, because a risk matrix at one point in time when it's agreed with the school has to change and evolve given young person's needs and what they want to do in terms of their own ambitions and sets of circumstances. So there has to be a degree of flexibility built in there to enable young people of all abilities and all needs to access a career coach when needed. The final point I would mention is we've talked a lot about S4. The majority of young people in S4 don't leave, they stay on. So for a lot of these young people who we talked about who may not have had a face-to-face engagement with a career coach in S4, can and will do so in S5 or F6 if that's required.
Yeah, I've got 4 members who want to ask supplementaries on this before we move on. Can I start with Colin?
Yeah, I was wondering, do we overestimate computer skills of young people? Quite a simple question, but you know, there's been some references through the documents I've got here as to the complexity of some of the websites and so on that they go to. Do we have this assumption that all young people have a reasonably high level of skills, and is that maybe a false thought?
There are people in our community who don't have good IT skills of whatever age, and there are people who don't have access to IT, and I think that's one of the reasons why the blended service is so important. But there is a reality here that lots of people do live their lives online. Not everyone, absolutely not. If you look at other sectors, retail, banking, holidays, they all have a blended service and they all provide services online. And the Scottish Government's digital strategy demands of public sector organisations that we take a digital-first approach. And by that, we mean what services can be delivered online should be delivered online, but it's not to say that we would ever ignore or underestimate the challenges for those people who don't have those digital skills. So I think that the benefits of the blended service are that we should recognise that, and the work that the career coaches do in schools working with teachers helps us to identify those who might struggle with those. So I think it's a really important point to recognise that not everyone can avail themselves of it. One of the other reasons that the digital service was so important to SDS is that it increases our reach. It's 24/7, and if you're geographically remote or you can't get to an SDS or a partner office, then you can avail yourself of the service, and then if you choose to, you can follow that up. So I think it's trying to consider the range of needs of different people and understand which of those types of services they should pull down at the points in time that are appropriate to them.
And I can understand from a cost point of view as to why providing a computer-based service is good in terms of delivery, because you get to more people at a lesser price. However, if you look at the situation across the whole of the UK, 36% of houses apparently do not have access to internet. In my constituency, it's 39%. That's an awful lot of households that don't have access. And I'm just interested, how do you actually target these people? I know that perhaps they can go to facilities within the schools and so on and use that, but if you don't have the capability at home, you're less likely to have developed the skills with which to be able to properly navigate these sites. How do we deal with that?
From an SDS perspective, we work with a range of partners across the country. We work with colleges, we work with libraries, we work with training providers, and we do a lot of engagement with those staff in those organisations to make sure that they're increasingly aware of My World of Work, for example, and that they are increasingly able to see where it fits with their service delivery and the needs of their customers. And I think for us that's an important aspect that we need to build upon with our partners to make sure that we jointly try and look at the range of services we have and how we can make them more easily accessible to our customers. But there are realities from just looking at the web service that there are challenges across the UK and elsewhere in access to IT. So again, it's recognising there is no one solution fits everyone and doing what we can. But you know, that aspect of our multi-channel service is digital, and so there will be constraints on who can access and how.
I would very much agree that there is very much, we tend to overestimate young people's ability. There's two different points. There's the point about access to provision, which is one thing. And the second point is about ability to use the websites effectively. And I would say both are an issue. But focusing on the ability to use websites effectively, our perceptions as kind of older adults is young people are on websites all the time and are very, very knowledgeable. But while they may be on websites a lot, that doesn't mean to say they have the skills to use them effectively and effectively in the context of their own career development. And there's a growing body of research, both in general about digital literacy and specifically about people using websites and other services for their career development, that shows that there really is a lack, and there's a need to develop digital career literacy skills. Because if you think about what's required, it's actually a very big ask. That young people have to be able to formulate the right questions, to really be able to judge the information that they're downloading or that they're seeing, to relate that to their own particular career needs and requirements. And I think that's a very big ask. And a number of sort of professionals involved in the area, are suggesting that there's a need to develop digital career literacy packages. That could be something that could be on My World of Work, and it certainly could be something that's part of careers education in schools, of developing digital career literacy skills.
Mr Logue, did you have a very brief?
Yeah, it was a very brief point to Mr Beattie's question about access as well, because we've talked about web services and face-to-face in schools, but we've got a network of over 50 centres across Scotland that young people and adults, because it's an all-age service, can actually come in to use the services within and talk to staff. And the point also about the partners, DWP, local authorities, colleges, and increasingly working very closely with the third sector and working with, again, people of all ages in terms of how they can access services out with the digital side as well is very, very important for us as well.
Okay, thank you. Marco Biaggi.
There's been a lot of reference to the risk matrix, and it seems a lot of the claims hinge on that. Do any of you have, by any chance, to hand the complete list of variables that it uses, or is that a rather lengthy list?
I can provide that to the committee, if that would be useful for you.
Yes, please.
I'll certainly do that.
Thank you. Yes.
To respond to that particular question, I was very pleased to hear Danny say that being unfocused in career is part of the risk matrix, because I have not seen any evidence of that to date. Certainly it was something that schools had no knowledge of. They thought they were only encouraging pupils forward if they had social, educational or economic needs. And many of them were quite concerned about the pupils who had that. So I too would like to see the risk matrix and to see precisely what it says, because that actually is a very encouraging surprise. And one thing I'd just also like to say, Danny's quite right to say we shouldn't talk about the website all the time, because it's the services around it. But we did find that there's only very small usage of the other services around the website, like 10% using email, 9% text, 7% Facebook, 7% chatting online, very small. And we did find that young people were able to discriminate between what some of the web-enabled services could and couldn't do. For example, they were saying that they were quite bemused at the idea of using these other services, that because how could you ask about your career if you didn't know who was at the other end? Could you trust them? Were they paying attention to you? Were they listening or talking to someone else while they were responding to you? And you couldn't ask them questions quite critically. And I think that there is an issue that comes out. We have in Scotland a policy that is for career information, advice and guidance. And the web-related services are described as for career information and advice. And what happens to guidance in the middle of that? That process whereby young people's ideas, if they're stereotypical, are challenged. If you use a website, you get reflected back what you've asked about. And it cannot pick up on contradictions, it can't raise aspirations or raise alternatives, it can't support and encourage individuals where there's anxiety about transition, and it can't check understanding and change tone and language level, all of those things, which is what a person can do. And it is encouraging that STS is still saying face-to-face is available, but that needs to be understood by young people.
I think when we consider what My World of Work actually is, it is an online service, and so it's difficult for any online service to pick up in the mood that you happen to have that day. However, we've looked long and hard at the resources that we have there. So we've moved to video clips, for example, short, concise, 3-4 minute long video clips of real people talking about their situation, what they do, why they do it. And the feedback we have is that that's very engaging, and it's complemented by text, descriptions of careers, occupations and so on. So I think what that does is it starts to bring to life career management information, opportunities, in a way that perhaps wasn't there before. And also the way that we have approached engagement with our customers. It is a web service, and there is a web chat facility that you can go online and you can engage with a careers advisor and advisor through our contact centre. But we accept that that's not for everyone. And while some young people would look at things like Twitter or Facebook as a personal thing, absolutely. But the resources and the tools that you get from My World of Work reflect a career management skills environment. So those resources that we have are very much focused on what we consider our offer, self-strengths, horizons and networks. And it's there to support people to build those skills. And we talk about self and strengths. It's really having to think about who you are, what you want to do, what your strengths are, and then how you can build on that understanding to look at course and job opportunities that are open to you, and then how you can take advantage of those. Now, some people can do that. You know, if you're a mature adult and you're thinking of changing job, you might go online and have a perfectly satisfactory experience in using these resources, given your maturity and context. You may be somebody of the same age who needs face-to-face support. So that's the benefit of having the blended service, is that you can pull down the type of service that you need. And if you want face-to-face support, then you can walk into an STS office and have a conversation with one of our staff.
Right, thank you. I'm just going to move. You'll have plenty of opportunity to speak in a moment, Mr. Corrie. Neil Bibby.
Thanks, Convener. I just wanted to follow up the points that have been raised already. Obviously, we've heard the research conducted by Dr. Howison and Ms. Semple suggest that just under a fifth of S4 pupils have received no careers provision. Ms. Logue, you mentioned earlier that many of these S4 pupils would be staying on after S4. But what appears to be from the research is this is from different attainment groups, whether it's low attaining groups, but it can be middle and higher attaining pupils as well. I just wanted to ask you, in terms of S4 pupils, what is the SDS statistics say? Obviously, we've heard the research from Dr. Howison and Ms. Semple suggesting just under a fifth of S4 pupils have received no careers provision. What is the SDS statistics on the number of S4 pupils that are receiving no careers provision?
We do, Mr. Bibby, is to provide yourself and the committee with statistics for the last academic year and this academic year to date in terms of across the year groups S4, S5 and S6 and the level of engagement right across there. So I can actually provide that because I don't have it with me today, but I'll certainly can provide that. I think the key point, as I mentioned earlier on, is that everybody in S4 will have at least 2 group work sessions. They will attend career management skills, My World of Work. Some will have a third session in labour market information as well. Over and above that, they can access the face-to-face targeted services if that's required. The key point I was making earlier on is that when young people move into S5 and into S6, again, they will have group work interactions with our staff in school, and again, we'll have the opportunity to access the face-to-face services. At S4, it's not a one and done in S4. In fact, even young people who've seen one of our staff in S4 can see them again in S5 and S6 if that particular need has been identified by our staff and teachers.
That information would be helpful, Mr Logue. In terms of further information, in your submission you mentioned that 339,236 engagements have taken place through a mix of group and individual appointments, with 162,099 individual people. Can you provide a breakdown in terms of the individual face-to-face interviews that comprised that 339,000 figure compared to group sessions?
I can provide that, Mr Bibby, in terms of both those who have attended group sessions, the number of attended group sessions and the number of individual engagements as well. I'll provide that to you.
And in terms of, it's been mentioned in terms of universal access to face-to-face interviews, is there a target that SDS have for the number of pupils that they would deem minimum risk to have face-to-face interviews in any year?
What we would look at previous years and identify how many roughly fell into that particular that cohort of, and what we talk about in there is about 60,000 young people would be supported in that particular group. But what I can do, as I said, I'll provide you with the figures for this year and last year in terms of the volumes that were actually taken, so you can see yourself both the 12-13 academic year and where we are today up to the end of February for that. The issue for us, Mr Bibby, is we work with the schools, and what we don't want to do is to say that there's a maximum number of pupils we can see, because what we're saying, anybody who needs that particular service within the school will get that service, whether it's face-to-face or universal. That's why it's very, very important that we sit down with teachers and guidance staff in schools to identify who actually needs that face-to-face. And the important point was, I mentioned earlier on, is about how we throughout the year, there's got to be a flex in there, flexibility. So if young people who then is deemed to have a need to see someone, then they can get the opportunity to do so.
What is the maximum number of pupils you could see if they requested a face-to-face?
Maximum we could see, well, there's a total number of, there's roughly 55,000 school leavers every year that we would see, and for many of them we would have seen in a face-to-face. What we have, as I mentioned earlier on, we have 255 full-time equivalent staff who are working within schools, and as part of the risk matrix we work out they're going to probably have about face-to-face interviews in a day, about 5. So that's based on the kind of numbers, the potential numbers of the staff that we have and the potential number of interviews that we would undertake.
In terms of staffing levels, you just mentioned that 235 full-time equivalent school career coaches, I think, and 20 full-time work coaches. I was just going to ask you that because you've also said that SDS has in fact increased the number of careers advisors in schools. I understand from a Freedom of Information request in 2011 that there was previously 502 full-time equivalent careers advisors. Where has the reduction in staffing taken place in the organisation if there's an increase in the number of careers advisors in schools?
No, the numbers, I'm not quite sure the Freedom of Information answer you have there, Mr Bibby, but what we have in total is there 255 staff working in school, but we're an all-age service, so we provide staff post-school to work in the centres I mentioned earlier on at Mr Beattie's question, the 50 centres that we have across the board. We also have a work coach service as well, so we've got, as well as the care coaches in schools, we have care coaches working post-school with 16 to 19-year-olds and 20 plus. We have a work coach service that's provided a much more intensive support for young people, and we also have personal advisors who resource all the centres that we have. And again, if it's useful, Mr Bibby, I can provide you with a breakdown of the total number of staff and the breakdown in terms of the various the job roles that are there.
That would be helpful. Thank you.
Thank you. Claire Adamson.
Good morning. I wanted to ask about the balance of the service in terms of obviously there's the need of an individual young person and the positive destination for them at the end of it, but there's also I think Miss Empel mentioned this about the the needs of the country and actually matching what's out there. And I'm from a technology background, and also at the weekend there's another article about IT shortages in the financial sector. We've got engineering constantly speaking to us about the demographic challenges. So I wondered, are we actually matching what are the aspirations of the young people with the realistic job opportunities and expectations at the end of it, if that is joined up, and what part the industries actually play in this? I'm thinking of the example of maybe Creative Skills, who are an industry-funded body. They also get government money to actually work and establish what the needs of that industry are.
We've looked at the information that we have in My World of Work, and since launch we have had quite a number of enhancements. One of those is to look at information about industry sectors to make sure that initially it was the 6 key government sectors, but we've added to that, including IT. And we also have a range of occupations descriptions, video clips and so on, all around IT skills, because we recognise how critical it is. But generally, and that's linked to course opportunities and to jobs. So one of the strengths of My World of Work is that you can give it a little bit more information than the basic registration information that you need, and it will then do a search and pull back to you all of the information that's relevant. So if you're interested, or you're looking at your strengths report or your interests report and trying to match that to occupations that might suit you, including things like IT, then the system will give you a degree of personalisation. So you have all of the job descriptions, the course information, the jobs, and you can see in the round if I want to enter the job market at a particular level, what kind of course would I have to do. And I think that's particularly helpful because it gives you a call to action. You can see what you then have to move forward and do. And we're increasingly looking at how do we engage with other sectors. So we're doing some work just now with the Glasgow Science Centre. We've worked with them to have what we've called Your Science Future Days. So it was around energy, where we had partners from industries across energy industries across Scotland coming to talk about what they do, why they do it, why it's challenging, but why it's great to do that as well. And it's been the buzz we had about, I think it was about 1,000 young people over a couple of days in the Science Centre, being able to engage directly with people who work in that sector, and we've just done the same with health. And we're going to have a physical space in the Science Centre that's around careers, so you can start to have a think about occupations in science, technology, engineering and maths, and we'll have some large screens there where you can explore information from My World of Work, and at particular events we'll have careers advisors there, so you get contextualised information about those key sectors.
Mr Lloyd, if you don't mind for a minute, I'll bring in the others first, okay? Mr Corrie.
I think that's an interesting point, and it kind of follows on from Mr Beattie's point about the kind of information aspect. There's many assumptions that are made about young people in terms of being the Google generation. Yes, they're very used to using information, but in a social context, the concern that our members have in terms of online services, that they don't actually allow you to discuss and reflect on some of the issues raised. Furthermore, not everyone can make sense of the deluge of information I would suggest that they get from some of these online services, and that's why our members would think that the important thing about the skilled careers guidance practitioner, that it allows them to interpret and I support the young people to applying it to them to their own personal circumstances. Without that support, some young people might make ill-informed career decisions, and that's the concerns that our members who are the frontline career practitioners and have. An important aspect of careers advice and guidance is to challenge stereotypical thinking and to encourage individuals to consider alternatives and to raise aspirations. And we also look to, for example, the Wood Commission's interim report. Some of the concerns about that is that perhaps the kind of negative view placed on some vocational opportunities as an alternative to higher education. Now, we would allege that if we don't ensure that young people get that face-to-face interaction with the skilled practitioner, we need to promote these opportunities as an alternative to a higher education, and that's assisted by the skills practitioner, our members would argue. It's all about, it's okay having this information, but it's about implying it, interpret it, and ensuring that that's considered as a suitable opportunity or alternative for young people, and that's important as we support young people moving into the world of work.
Well, as I said at the start, I don't want everybody answering every question, but if it's very brief this lunch.
I just want to say I think it's a really good point, but I think it's also really important that we challenge young people much earlier as well, because by the time they come to fourth year, they've already picked subjects. So I think, you know, in second year or earlier, when they're considering sciences and things, it's really important that they're challenged and the opportunities are talked about at that point, and you know the excitement is there. You know, they can see what this can lead to encourage young people to look at science and engineering and different things as well.
Thank you, Dr. Howson.
Well, in the interest of brevity, I will not continue what I was going to say, because basically both James and Kate have made the point that it needs earlier intervention and challenge. That is fine, getting information about something you're already interested in, but you might not have thought of a career in technology.
Mr. Rowe.
3 points. One is, I suppose it relates to Mr Beattie's point earlier. We did a MyWow survey of users, 40% of whom were of the age 16 to 24, and 89% of them found My World of Work easy to understand, and 84% of them found it easy to use. But I think James makes some really interesting points, and one of the things we've looked at is actually, if you look at Curriculum for Excellence, skills for life, learning and work, there's quite an overlap between the generic skills that we want to equip our young people with, and we've created a new aspect of My World of Work called Partner Zone that we co-created with teachers. And in there are now 10 resources, and you know the point about challenging stereotypes and considering different routes to employment, we've created with teachers 2 resources about those very things. There's one about understanding about what stereotypes are, the viewpoint you have. You don't have to be a bloke to be an engineer, whatever it may be, and also different routes to employment. If you want to be a medical person, for example, there's a whole raft of different avenues in there, and so we're working with teachers to jointly support young people in schools to widen their understanding. And I think that joint work with Curriculum for Excellence, we're working with Education Scotland on school profiles, so we can start to link some of the information and services in My World of Work and see how that maps directly into the service and the support that teachers are giving young people through Curriculum for Excellence. And I think the other thing it's worth pointing out is that Skills Development Scotland, we've been working with industry sectors to develop skills investment plans to work with industry to understand what the needs of that industry are in the future to enable us to compete effectively as an economy, and what the skills needs are following on from that. So that's helping to inform the delivery from universities and colleges, but also helping to inform the kinds of resources and support that we have in My World of Work and that our careers advisors and young people and partners like teachers can draw upon.
Okay, thank you. I've got 4 members who have indicated they want supplementaries in this kind of area, so if you could be brief. I'll start with Liam.
Thank you. It was just following on a question from Neil earlier on in relation to resources, and we're aware of budget reductions and the staffing pressures that inevitably will create. But Mr Doyle, you were mentioning previously a presumption, a digital-first assumption through the digital strategy, which is understandable, but that would lead me to think that the way in which the face-to-face engagement is perhaps promoted is not necessarily as encouraging as it might be, that the availability of certainly is made clear to people, but in a sense they're made to feel that it is otherly, so that if they're unfocused or they are in a particular economic bracket or they're academically not performing at the highest level, in all those contexts, face-to-face meetings are appropriate, which makes me think that that's almost an admission of failure if they find themselves feeling that they need the face-to-face engagement, which I just would have thought is likely to be a turn-off. Is that not a fair reflection of where we are? I mean,
Mr. McCarthy, no, you're absolutely not. I wouldn't say that, because what we are doing, as I mentioned there, we do provide the universal service, as we've always done since the start of the career service in the 70s. And there's been targeted services since the 70s, and so it's not a new concept at all. And for us, the key message for us, for pupils, for teachers, for parents and for staff is if anybody needs a face-to-face intervention in school, they will get one, irrespective of background, need, academic ability or whatever. What we've tried to do with the risk matrix, and more importantly, the risk matrix is not a concept that SDS created. Local authorities use risk matrices within schools to identify learning needs as well. It's about how we make sure that we identify those who are most at risk of securing a positive destination. And secondly, and equally important, anyone who needs that face-to-face intervention will absolutely get one. And that includes, because I was a careers advisor myself a number of years ago, those young people who look academically sorted, quite a number of them in work I did many years ago, highlighted about 25% of them were all over the place. They didn't really know what they wanted to do. They needed, back to what Cathy said earlier on, they needed that kind of challenge. So that's why we make sure that, as well as offering the targeted service for young people who have identified in schools, there is that facility for anybody to access the services within school.
To the risk matrix that local authorities use in terms of identifying learning needs, I mean, there's figures produced by the government that indicate that the disparity or the discrepancy between the approach each local authority takes for that identification is vast. So if you're using a similar risk matrix, is there not a danger that in certain areas and certain schools this is operating absolutely fine, and in other areas, just because of the way in which it's applied, it's not operating fine at all?
That's why we have within SDS our own SDS risk matrix that sits alongside. So we have the local authority one, we also have an SDS which I'm going to provide earlier on it was mentioned, and that will identify the factors that we also use within that. But one of the other factors that has to be used in there, and if I was a teacher or guidance staff, I would be using what I call the CS factor, and that's called the common sense factor. If you know there's a young person who's not been identified as a maximum risk because of their career maturity or whatever, you would want to make sure then you would identify them as needing support from a career coach within schools. That's why it needs that interaction between ourselves and the school in terms of how we identify those who need it, and during the year or the years in the schools, that a young person can access that service whenever he or she particularly needs it.
Dr. Howison.
Yes, two different points. One is I just like to draw the committee's attention to Table 2 in the evidence we submitted, which shows the difference in pupils' career-related activities in the study we did in 2009 and the most recent one in 2013. And what that shows is that there's been a drop over that period in the face-to-face contact that young people are receiving, certainly in S4, most dramatically in terms of the percentage who are getting an interview, an appointment on their own with their school careers advisor, down to 29% from 43%, and a slight decrease in the proportions calling in at the drop-in clinic sessions. There has been some increase in the proportions using what was in 2009 the website then, and now the current one, but it's not an enormous increase. So in that period there has been a decrease in the amount of face-to-face contact. And the other point I'd like to make and draw the committee's attention to is the variation across schools. I mean, you were referring to the variation across authorities in terms of the risk matrix and so on. We were very surprised in the research to find the extent of variation in whether or not young people had had any careers advice across schools. I mean, varying from like 0 in one school to about 27% in another school. And that's indicated in the charts in our submission. And, you know, that basically means that in some schools, you've got maybe just 15% having an interview. In another school, you can have 40% having an interview and so on. And critically, that was not related to the profile of the school and the pupils. So it wasn't related to, say, being in an area of deprivation, the attainment profile of the school, the catchment of the school, and so on. There was no obvious explanation. Because you would expect some variation given that, in relation to the nature of the school and its role, but that wasn't the explanation.
We'll move on. I was going to ask earlier, but it's come up again, so I'll do it now. The question of STS. You said earlier, I think Mr. Logue, it was yourself, that everybody's offered an S4 careers guidance. Whether I presume that's the kind of universal service I speak to. If everybody receives that, why are there schools that are recording effectively that a quarter of the pupils received no careers help?
Well, in terms of what I said earlier on, that S4 pupils will have access to at least 2 group sessions. That's part of the universal service they get within the school. And over and above that, they can have the focus when that's the face-to-face. And what I'll do, back to Mr Bibby's question on that, can provide the breakdown of the S4 5 pupils, 6 pupils across each of the schools that there. The other issue for us is back to research. There's only...
Before you move on, I'm still not clear. Are you saying that all S4 pupils receive the universal?
Yes, that's group sessions, yes.
Well, why is it the case in these tables that, you know, up in one school a quarter, well, more than a quarter, receive nothing according to this research? Because that's talking about face-to-face. I take it that's not.
No, it's not. That's any.
That was my understanding. That Dr Howson said it was any service.
Every secondary school in Scotland, all the S4 pupils will have access. They will attend at least two group sessions within the school.
Dr Howson, how is it the case if every pupil receives at least 2 group sessions, then you can have statistics which show that in one case 29% didn't?
So it's direct me.
Yes.
Yeah. We asked the young people. That's what the young people said. We were not allowed to talk to the careers advisors in these schools, so we've no way of explaining that figure. But that figure includes introductory talks, clinic sessions, one-to-one interviews, talking to teachers, using the Careers Library, using My World of Work, and using Planet Plus. So it's an extremely wide definition. It's not even restricted to SDS services. These are young people who haven't even talked to their teachers about their career ideas.
So are you really suggesting that, in fact, that in a school in Scotland, 29% of pupils received absolutely nothing?
Yes. Yeah.
That seems to be absolutely contradictory to what SDS are saying, or suggesting. Yeah. I mean, these two things cannot be correct. Yeah. One of them is wrong.
Well, as I say, it would have helped if we had, as in the earlier study in 2009, been able to go into the schools and interview the school careers advisor to find out what provision was being put in place in reality, as opposed to what the policy says.
You said earlier that you made a criticism of the response that SDS made about the fact that what they're recording is what pupils report. Yes. But your figures are based on, as I understand what you've just said,
yes,
of what pupils report.
Yes.
Now, I don't want to criticise S4 pupils, but when I was a pupil of that age and somebody asked me a question about, well, did you ever receive something to do with career guidance, I'm not sure that I would be particularly great at answering that question with any degree of accuracy.
Yeah, I mean, having worked as a careers advisor myself, I know that sometimes pupils don't necessarily recognise it. But, you know, in that case, it certainly hasn't had any impact. But yes, that's why it would have been important to be able to go and talk to the school careers advisor, because then we could have offset, we could have explored the issue. But also, I don't think there's any contradiction in what I said at the beginning about the difference between client satisfaction measures, you know, which is obviously asking the person, and looking at effectiveness, because it's two different things.
Earlier, so I'll bring in Mr. Corrie here at this point.
I think when we reviewed that finding from the research as well, that was also of a concern to us. But I think, to be fair, whilst the point is well made that our members would have appreciated the opportunity to participate in that, because there might have been a perfectly logical explanation to why that figure was the case. I would go back to the aspect in terms of the concern about the profile of the advisor in the school. We would also expect that some of these pupils have asked. That talk may have happened in August or September, and you're right in terms of, if you ask those pupils, have you had any careers input? Well, whilst our concern is of the profile of the advisor in the school, I can fully appreciate that as an organisation we need to ensure that young people are aware of the My World of Work website and the merits of careers management skills. But several months down the line, if you ask a pupil, you know, have you had any careers input, I could understand where they might say, no, I don't recall that. Or in some instances they said, oh, was that woman that came to see us a couple of months ago? So whilst I think that figure's a concern to us all here, I would also appreciate the issue that if they could speak to the careers advisor at that time, there might have been a perfectly logical explanation for that. It might not have drastically reduced that figure, but I think that could have been the fact of the issue about the profile. Do you recall actually the careers advisor come in, or was it somebody several months ago come in and did you a talk on My World of Work? Do they associate that to being any careers input in? It's
Thank you. Mr Logue.
Yeah, I think one of the issues for us is in terms of the S456 talks, we have to programme them throughout the year. So I don't know whether there's been a timing issue in here, but just to reassure the committee here today that young people, as I said earlier on, get access to that universal, those group work sessions, and then if required, face-to-face. The second thing I think is very important to note is it's not the responsibility of SDS to deliver its careers education programmes and careers in schools. That's the responsibility of schools. What SDS does is to play a supporting role, how we work with young people, parents and teachers. So there is a responsibility recognised through Curriculum for Excellence in terms of the core skills that are trying to be developed there. And what we're actually saying, but we're all violently probably agreeing here, is we are saying what's really, really important is that career management skills should be a core skill within Curriculum for Excellence, and recognising the responsibility that schools and others have to deliver that in the supporting role that we provide as well.
Thank you. Lots of members want in, so I'm going to start with Jane and then Claire.
Thank you, Convener. That actually leads quite nicely into my question, because I'm sitting here wondering how all this is monitored and where it's reported and who's accountable for it. So do SDS have any targets? Does the Scottish Government have any expectation or requirement on SDS to meet targets, and if so, in what topics?
The actual targets that SDS have on behalf of the Scottish Government relate more to the services provided around modern apprenticeships and the Employability Fund. 25,000 modern apprenticeships, for example, is in there. Within the Careers Information Advice and Guidance Service, there's not any particular target. What we said, we will identify and work with pupils within schools. We've got a risk matrix, roughly saying we would work with about 60,000 young people within the school. But these are profiles that we've identified and shared. Not that Scottish Government have given to us, like modern apprenticeships and the employability funds. So internally, that's what we've based and looked at numbers. And I can provide, back to sort of linked to Mr Bibby's point earlier on, I can have a breakdown of what those profiles actually look like.
Just quickly. And just a question for everyone. Are there enough careers advisors in schools then, given what we've heard this morning about the need for early intervention and the need to be challenging pupils a bit more about their aspirations? Are there enough people on the ground to do that effectively?
A trade union comment on, we would suggest, I mean, Mr Bowie asked a question about kind of 2011 Freedom of Information requests. Skills Development Scotland, like most public bodies, I would argue, has had, budgetary challenges. We've had 2 rounds of voluntary severance since 2011, whilst I can't dispute an allegation about more careers advisors being, on the ground in schools. Ultimately, in terms of our face-to-face offer to all people within Scotland, it's clearly there has been a reduction in the amount of individuals who actually deliver that face-to-face service, whilst it might not be necessarily in the school environment. In terms of the whole, in terms of school and post-school, we've clearly had that reduction. I appreciate it's a budgetary concern for all organisations, but I would also argue the academic research clearly shows that in terms of careers management skills, that face-to-face intervention is having a positive effect on young people's careers management skills. So it would be a plea for yes, we could always be doing with additional individuals, but I'm sure all public bodies would come to the Parliament and make that assertion. But ultimately I would make that assertion because it's what works, frankly. It is what works, that interaction with the careers advisor, the skilled professional, and a face-to-face intervention is working. And if we're all about ensuring public resources are directed effectively, at the very least we need to look at a refocusing of this. But if this committee has any influence in increasing the amount of face-to-face practitioners, it will have the fulsome support of Unison, who represent the careers advisors.
That's probably the least surprising answer this morning, Mr Coyne. Thank you. Did SDS want to respond to that?
Yes. Yes, just to answer that question as well. Yes, I mean, in terms of the resources we have just now to deliver the service model, we have sufficient resources in terms of what we're doing just now. If there were additional asks, particularly when we start talking even earlier intervention, today we're focused on S4, 5 and 6. There is some work undertaken in S3. particularly with the young people who've got a coordinated support plan within S3, and we do other work earlier with parents as well. But if there was earlier intervention and providing a service where all pupils in school, S1 to S6, had a complete access to resources, then there is a resource question, absolutely. But in terms of what we're currently doing, yes, we're sufficient. But if there are additional asks, particularly extensive earlier intervention type programmes, whether it's in even in late primary school, primary 6, primary 7 as well, there would be resource challenges. And as James already said, that would be something that would obviously government would have to look at in terms of funding.
Thank you very much. A brief supplementary from Claire Adamson.
Brief supplementary. My understanding is that all S4 pupils do a week's work placement as part of the curriculum. I find it really hard to understand how, in the organisation of that week's placement, that there would be no career discussion with that young person at all, from a teacher or from some other area.
Simple. Dr Howison?
Yes. I think in terms of work experience, we have to think about what its purpose is, and it is largely not a career choice. It's generally intended not to be a match, not a job trial of what you're interested in. So the only career element that tends to come into it is the job application bit. Preparing yourself for going, learning about a new work environment, presenting yourself in writing and being interviewed and all of that. I do agree with you that there actually ought to be much more of a, now that you've done this, what does this tell you about how you might find a place for yourself in work or training? And it tends not to be there. While I've got the microphone, a couple of things. One, picking up on your point earlier about stereotyping in industry and new ideas. It's really, really important that we look at how that actually can be challenged, because we do know that it's not sufficient to put, say, a group of girls in front of female engineers and or ask them to look at something on a website. Because what happens is that yes, stereotypical ideas change, and they say, yes, girls can do that, but I'm not going to. And until there's a change, the only way you get a change in thinking, the evidence shows, is if the challenging happens within the context of your own personal decision-making, which is why the challenge of guidance is really important. And same with technology. It can open aims, but it may not actually change the direction of the young person. And a point I would take from that is that it sounds a no-brainer that if you put young people in front of something that is going to change their ideas, there are big question marks about whether that is sufficient without the chance to integrate it into your own personal thinking. A second point, sorry.
I just want... I suppose I want to challenge you on the comments you made, a very black and white description of what happens in the work experience week. My experience is very different, and I'm talking about as a parent of a girl who's in that very category, and her friends, who chose their work experience based on the very kind of subject choices they were about to make and the kind of area of work that they were interested in, or thought they were interested in at that age, doing when they left school, or indeed the courses they might want to go into a higher or further education. It seems to me that it's clearly a kind of career choice type decision that was taken to then try and get work experience in that area. You said, no, it's not. I find that slightly odd.
Are we talking about work experience or work shadowing or work trials?
It was work experience that you were asked about work experience.
Yeah. I think the problem, if you try and deliver work, I'm not disagreeing that it happens that way. If you try and deliver it in that way, you cannot actually get... Certain occupations, for example, are closed off to young people, and they cannot try out their career ideas. And there's quite a bit of evidence that young people try something, they get a kind of skewed view of it, and it changes their career ideas, perhaps inappropriately. But yes, a lot of schools do actually deliver it in that way. But the basic aim of it is not primarily a job taster, but of an introduction to the world of work and to the demands that employers might have and how they might present themselves. Yes, it's often part of a programme in that way, but in my view, it's not as appropriate as a more general introduction.
Okay, thank you. Sorry for interrupting you there. Okay, I have George, Adam and Neil Bibby for 2 quick questions, because we really have to move on.
All right, thank you, Convener. This will probably shock a few people, but Mr Logue's people have left school in the past 30 years. I'm one of them. And I know that's probably my regular career choices that Mr Corey talked about that's possibly caused that. But it was targeted then as well, because I never saw anyone. My wife, similar ages, she never saw anyone. She went to uni, I went to working world. It was positive destinations, and is that not the important aspect of all this? Mr Logue already talked about the positive destinations that we had last year as well. And when you look at the fact that I look at some of the stuff from SDS here about from S1 to S6, there's interaction with young people throughout the session, more so from what I remember from a career point of view. And when you look at the whole idea of the self, strengths, horizons and networks, that's a great basis to have young people to get an opportunity to build towards the kind of career they want. You know, so my question is more along the lines that not about the positive destinations, and also we talk about my world of work here. You know, from what I'm getting here, from everything that's said, yeah, there's things that need to be sorted and maybe tweaked. But on the whole, it's a basket of measures. It's a whole group. It's not just my world of work. It's everything else that's involved there, whether it be face-to-face communication with people, whether it actually be the teacher themselves, who are very important in the process. You know, is it not just that we're getting this down the process of just getting this whole basket of measure and getting these positive destinations?
Okay. Mr Logue or Mr Royal, do you want to start?
I'll kick off. Thanks, Mr Aaron, for the question. I think it's back to the point I mentioned at the very beginning about the importance of having a blended channel in terms of how we deliver services, which includes, as you correctly identified there, the web service, our face-to-face in contact centre, and the work we do with partners as well. So that's the blended, and that's very, very important to suit the various sorts of needs that are there. The other point that you mentioned there as well, I'm going to quote Dr Deirdre Hughes. She's the commissioner, one of the commissioners on the UK Commission for Light and Skills. She's also chair of the National Careers Council for England. She's been up working with us fairly recently, and she actually said that Scotland's adopted a pioneering approach underpinned by robust theoretical and practice-based models of career management skills, career guidance and coaching compared to other parts of the UK, the EU and international career policy frameworks. So it's a recognition from someone from the UK about the approach, and I think it was Cathy mentioned at the very beginning about the OECD in terms of the potential we have as a country in terms of having its career services delivered to a very high level. And at the final point I would mention as well is about the importance of the Self-Strengths Horizons Network. She mentioned the career management skills that we've in the model we've now introduced. The key issue for that is how does it actually articulate and fit in with the core skills that have been developed through Curriculum for Excellence. That's the key point here, how we make sure we get that joined up. So it does become, career management skills do become one of the core skills that we're trying to engender and develop within our young people. So it's how do we join up all of those approaches. It's not the responsibility of one organisation like SDS, it's a whole partnership approach to everybody who's involved and all the influencers and others who deliver services in this area as well.
Yes, I mean, we would entirely support the idea of a blended service. And, you know, when I said at the beginning that I think we have the potential to be world leading, you know, that is partly because of the blended service. The issue is access to that blended service. That not everyone is currently able to access the different elements of that service. They don't necessarily even know about it, and they don't necessarily know how to access the different elements. So I would say that's a critical thing. So we've got some of the building blocks in place, but there needs to be other developments to enable the full potential to be reached. And in terms of positive destinations, I don't think SDS would claim full credit for the positive destinations. I think you've got to give some credit to the schools as well for the positive destinations. But equally, if you look at dropout rates from modern apprenticeships, from further and higher education, I don't think we can be complacent about the fact that some young people are still not getting much in the way of career guidance.
Thank you. Neil Bibby.
Thanks. Mr Doyle mentioned earlier My World of Work users survey, obviously with 350,000 registrants on the web service. I wonder if you could provide the committee details of how many surveys you've issued and how many have been returned, in addition to the information requested from Mr Logue. In terms of the support in schools, it's been mentioned that S1 to S2 provided weekly drop-in clinics for pupils nervous about their long-term prospects. And in S3, intensive one-to-one career coach support is provided for those who need it, as well as a formal introduction to My World of Work for all pupils and parents. And S3 onwards, pupils are actively encouraged to attend drop-in clinics. In-depth coaching is available up to 30 sessions per student. My question on that would be, in terms of what S1 to S2, how do S1 to S2 pupils access that and know about it if you haven't spoken to them about it? And in terms of S3, just simply to ask, given what we've heard about S4, S5 and S6, is what is there in terms of S3 and S3 onwards actually happening just now in our schools?
Sorry, I missed my apologies. Yeah, in terms of S1 and S2, we just promote the clinic session within schools to let people know that they can come along. It's linked to, particularly with subject choice with S2 and increasingly more with S3 now in terms of the new curriculum, where young people are aware of the fact they can come along to a clinic and speak to a career coach who's within the school. The S3 area that you mentioned there as well, Mr Bibby, what we've been talking to schools about, and the reason why it mentions S3 about group work, where we've had feedback from head teachers that the best time to deliver some of the S4 group talks we've been doing is earlier in S3, because it ties into subject choice. It's been undertaken within the school, and that's why the reference you have there is talking about moving that back into S3. A lot of the S3 individual work, just now I mentioned earlier on, in terms of coaching, it's tended to be even more targeted because it's about the coordinated support plan, additional support needs and other young people who need that particular support within the school, and that's been the focus of S3. And then when it comes to S4 onwards, S4, 5 and 6, that's where you have the much more wider access to face-to-face services within the school as well.
Okay, thanks for that. And I just wanted to ask you also about a comment you made in your written evidence. It says, SDS would argue that wider research has not shown a single careers interview, regardless of the quality of the professional involved, has any significant impact on a young person. My question following that statement is, what's the point? What's the point in offering access to single careers interviews if they don't have any significant impact on a young person? Also, would ask, what is the wider research and how many interviews does it take to have any significant impact? Is it 2? Is it 3? Is it 4? Is it 5? I was quite surprised by that comment, but perhaps you want to expand on what you said.
Yeah, I think the issue for us in terms of the service that we have now, what we've been wanting to do, or now delivering within school, is one that's much more targeted. And what that meant was, rather than offering everybody or a majority of people 45 minutes for a careers interview, and that's generally, when you speak externally to people, think of your interaction with a careers advisor back at school again. That 45 minutes, if that single intervention was going to create some miracle and a change in terms of individuals, what we're trying to do now, wanting to do within the service we provided, when it's much more targeted, which means we can actually have a longer engagement with a young person. So rather than just a one-off, it can be much more intensive, so there can be multiple engagements with a young person, and that reflects the difficulties or the issues and needs that young person has. In terms of determining, we've estimated roughly about, for young people, they could need up to about, it could be 30, because some of the information you've got there relates to post-school work. But within a school, it really depends on the individual, the needs they have, what they want to do, their capabilities, their aspirations, and what they want to do. So what we've built into the model is a flexibility in it to respond to the number of engagements a young person needs, depending on what their issues are.
I mean, I understand what we're, in terms of what we're talking about in terms of targeted support, but what you've said is a single careers interview, regardless of the quality, doesn't have any significant impact on a young person. I mean, later on you're going to say SDS would dispute the claim that My World of Work has limited impact on pupils' career management skills. So you're talking up or defending My World of Work in terms of the input that can have, but you seem to be suggesting that not one, a single careers interview won't have any significant impact. I understand what you're talking about in terms of targeting, but surely, these interactions do have an impact. Otherwise, why are you offering them? What's the point in offering single careers interviews, as you do to minimum risk students, if they don't have any significant impact?
Yeah, the issue for us is about, there's two things. One is, it's back to the point that Cathy mentioned earlier on, about that's why we're undertaking further research to look at more into the impact rather than just the kind of how people...
Here,
yeah.
you're saying now you're going to take out wider, you said, would argue that wider research has shown that single careers interviews don't provide any significant impact. Now you're saying further research has to be taken.
Yeah, I'm saying that there has been some research done over the years around that, whether the OECD, there was the World Bank, there's been a number of them looking at interventions in terms of young people. What I'm saying, within our research and evaluation, we're going to be conducting even more of that, particularly around the impact measures. The other issue for us as well about saying, for certain young people, a one-off intervention will be sufficient, and that's it. But what we are saying is, for the model we have now, Mr Bibby, it's really, really important that we provide the resources and the flexibility for young people to have the number of engagements they require within a school. And that's why we're saying it's not just a focus on just a one-off, it's about that multiple engagement we have with young people.
Dr Howson.
Could I just say that the research that we did for then Career Scotland, the predecessor of Skills Development Scotland in 2009, found that an interview with a careers advisor improved young pupils' career management skills. So, I mean, that's one source of evidence which STS accepted and published, which shows that a one-off careers interview does have an impact. And there is indeed a body of research. Whiston, for example, did a meta-analysis of a number of studies, and that was the conclusion that the face-to-face interview was amongst the most effective. I mean, I would agree with Danny in terms of one single long interview isn't necessarily the best solution for everyone. For some people, particularly adults, a series of shorter interviews where they go off in the interim and do some tasks and think and then come back might be the answer. So we're certainly not arguing a return to the kind of blanket interviewing where everyone, whether they wanted it or not, was sat down in front of a careers advisor and given a 45-minute interview. But there's certainly robust evidence to show that interviews are effective. But I certainly would agree that, yeah, we should be more flexible in how we do it. And I would like to ask SDS for detail about how they're actually going to look at impact. How are they actually going to measure it? Will it be hard evidence?
Very, very briefly, Mr Corrie.
I would say that when, from a careers guidance professional's perspective, when I saw that statement as well, I think we need to be very, very careful about these types of statements being in the public domain. I can understand the assertion that the continual interaction may have a more positive impact, but Skills Development Scotland, in terms of that statement being out there, I would suggest that doesn't imply that the government skills body is promoting the value and the merit of careers advice and guidance. And we also need to be acutely aware that in many of the services we offer, there is, in many instances, a one-off interaction. The PACE service, for example, the Integrated Employment Service, for example, and even some of the minimum risks interactions. I think it could have been worded better, is what I would suggest, because to look at that, I also would be concerned about our members who are frontline careers guidance professionals, who in many instances are offering a one-off interaction, would say, is the assertion there that the efforts I'm putting in not have another positive impact? I think it could have been worded better. I understand it's suggesting that more ongoing and regular contact would have a positive interaction.
I mean, I accept what you're saying, but in the context of the paragraph which I'm looking at just now, the follow-on sentence, it's part of a paragraph. The second sentence says there is much stronger evidence to support targeted interventions, etc. So I accept what you're saying, and perhaps wording sometimes is not at its best, but it's also sometimes not helpful when it's taken out of context. I think that's not helpful either. However, we have really run out of time, but I still have 3 members who want to come in, so I'm not going to take any supplementaries on these 3 members, but I'm very quickly going to take them. I'm going to start with Mary Scanlon.
Well, I think I have 3 very brief questions. The first one is, as a member of the Public Audit Committee, we got a report from Audit Scotland on the public sector workforce. Can you remind me how many, what was the reduction in the STS workforce? From memory, I thought it was 200 or 400. Can you remind me what it was? It was about 2 years ago.
Sorry, I actually not got that detail. We can provide that detail to you?
Audit Scotland report on Skills Development Scotland. You don't know how many people you lost. Do you remember it was in the hundreds?
Yeah, it was, but I wouldn't want to, because I can't remember right off the top of my head what that figure is, but I'll get you that.
I think James Corrie can remember, convener, can I?
I think when Skills Development Scotland was created, we had some 1,530 staff, but to be fair, that was the co-joining of Learn Direct, the skill side of Scottish Enterprise and the Legacy Career Scotland. I think since then we had 2 rounds of VS, and I think the agency at that time perceived there was a need for a staffing complement of some 1,350 full-time equivalents. I don't know what the current situation is, because we need to bear in mind working through things like a modern apprenticeship recruitment programme and taking on interns to support Scottish Government policy.
I do appreciate that, but it was in the hundreds, and I appreciate the mergers as well. But there was a significant reduction. And convener, can I just ask briefly, and forgive me because this is my first day on the committee, so I have less of a background information than other members. I'm not sure, I don't understand why the researchers from the university were barred from talking to careers advisors in modern democratic Scotland. Can someone tell me why you weren't allowed to speak to careers advisors?
Well, we had several meetings with Danny to try and say this would be helpful because we could better understand our findings, and we can feed back and have a dialogue. The SDS view, and I'm sure Danny will say this, is that it was too early, that the new system was just bedding in, so it was too early to evaluate.
So Danny didn't allow you to speak to careers advisors?
Yeah. But our view was that if the system was such that this was the offer to pupils, that it was certainly well enough established to be looked at, because if it wasn't well enough established to be evaluated by researchers, it wasn't well enough established to be the offer to young people.
I'm just concerned, convener, that most of the problems are, because the researchers couldn't talk to the careers advisors, it's actually taken a lot of our time today.
Let's bring in Mr. Logue or Mr. Doyle on that.
I wouldn't agree with the fact that a lot of the issues not speaking to staff, because we've got the research that Cathy and Sheila's done. We've got evaluation feedback that we've got as well. And I mentioned earlier on we've got a rolling programme of research and evaluation. The point at the time why we weren't involved, we had literally the month before had introduced career management skills into the school. Career management is a new service offer. It was literally weeks old, and we felt getting involved in very early days. We've only introduced it a month, the previous month. It was far, far too early to be involved in that kind of evaluation. But in terms of, it's now been up and running now for 2 years, so we're in a much better position now to get a feel for how the service is going. We've actually been flexing and adapting the service over the last 2 years based on feedback from staff, from teachers and from pupils as well.
A decent piece of research that could have all been covered. And final.
Very quickly, Mary, please.
The main talking point from this seemed to be the conclusion that My World of Work had a limited impact on pupils' careers management. I noticed from SDS that they say their web service is responsive and intuitive to the needs of its customers. And if the web service has a limited impact, why is it that there are 4% fewer drop-in sessions, 14% fewer appointments with the careers advisors, and 17% fewer pupils getting leaflets and books? There's a drop-off in everything and a 7% increase in the website use, which has a limited impact. And that's my final question.
In terms of My World of Work and its usage and being responsive, one of the things that we've done within SDS is to invest in a capability of some service designers, and their job is to engage with colleagues and customers to better understand what it is they need from an organisation like SDS and the services we offer, and how we can best present that. So when we talk about the system being intuitive and responding to people's needs, what we have done is to give ourselves the opportunity to sit down and talk to customers and hear from them what they want, to speak to teachers, to speak to careers advisors up and down the country. And so we hope that what we have created, and I think we're confident it does, that it's a world-class web service, and that the resources and the tools within that give an added dimension to a blended service, but it is a blended service.
Thank you very much. Colin Beattie and then finally Claire Adamson.
Thank you, Vera. I'd like to look at tables 1 and 2 of Cathy Howson and Sheila Semple's submission. Percentages are good indicators, but what was the size of the sampling on this?
Just over is 1,300 odd pupils, and basically it was about 90% of the S4 year group in each of the 14 schools. The 14 schools were broadly representative of the range of schools in Scotland.
Thank you. Now, I understand, for example, that SDS have other feedback and so forth. Do the other evaluations have similar results? Because these are very significant results in terms of both the tables, and what do we interpret from that?
Thanks, Mr. Bean. We've so far we've done a number of pieces of evaluation feedback from pupils in S4, 5 and 6, and we're just currently, in fact, we've just finished a series of feedback sessions with all head teachers in Scotland about the actual service model and how we're delivering. In terms of the services we provide, and that was very positive feedback. We'll be producing a report from the head teachers evaluation very shortly, and the group work sessions that we have as well. The other point to mention is that, because this was taken, it was last, it was, well, in 2009 there were a number of schools, and then there was 14 schools back in 12-13 that Cathy and Sheila looked at, and since then our model was introduced that year, academic year, so we're now a further academic year into it as well. And I think going back out and conducting that kind of research again, it'd be interesting to see what kind of feedback we would actually get, because I think you would find it would be quite different, because now all young people I've mentioned earlier on have had the exposure to at least 2 group work sessions within schools. There's a lot of work going on with parents' evenings. Rob talked earlier on about a lot of the work we're doing with teachers and partner zone and developing resources for teachers to use that refer to this. And also some of the issues that were highlighted in Cathy and Sheila's report as well talked about career support. It wasn't just about SDS, it's much broader than that. So it's back to the point I mentioned earlier on about the important role that the school has to play in how it supports careers, education and provision within the curriculum.
So are you actually saying that these figures that have been produced just now, these percentages we're looking at, really we should wait? They're too early, or are they valid? Is it something we should be interpreting and learning from, or what?
I think because it reflected a period of time when that particular piece of research was actually done. I think the other point I said at the very beginning, because in fact a lot of the research, the findings that Sheila and Cathy actually found actually reflect a lot of our experience as well in terms of feedback. So we have been listening to and learning from how we've been delivering the service in the last 2 years and making certain refinements. That some of the tables in there also reflect the broader school offer. So it's about how are schools learning from that in terms of how they provide career support within the school, and very, very importantly, how do we make sure that we join up the work that SDS does with what's actually happening within the school as well.
Does your interpretation agree broadly with these figures?
Yes, at that particular time. And back to the point that Cathy mentioned as well, and it was for a particular cohort, S4 cohort as well, and what we provide, and as I said earlier, for the majority of S4 pupils, they won't actually leave school in S4, they're going to actually stay on into S5 and S6, so that gives us different times and different academic years when young people can actually access the service.
Okay, thank you. A brief final question from Claire Adamson.
If I could look at the implications that are listed in point number 3 from the research, and focusing what works, a mixed system of careers provision, and in the context of what you've said about this being at a particular time, I was interested in 2 of the bullet points in terms of developing careers libraries in schools and also supporting teachers in their career development role with pupils. But my understanding, and sort of local to my own region, is that school library services and librarians have actually been cut, and how you think that might actually be achieved.
Whether Dr. Howson?
Right.
So it was your, as I understand it, the point is about your research which said this had an implication.
Yes, there's already been some reaction. One of the things we did as part of our research was we gave individual feedback to each of our schools and to the local authorities that they belong to. And there's already been some indication that they're trying to support and develop the careers libraries in their schools and make a case for some extra funding. But it was actually a finding that surprised us a bit, the absolute strength of the finding that this very traditional approach to getting career information it did impact so strongly on young people. But yes, there's already in the schools and authorities we worked with, some signs of change in that.
Okay. Oh, sorry.
No, that's fine. And it was just to say, but you're saying you're developing careers libraries, but the libraries are not in the same position exactly as World of Work. If the support, the guidance and all the support is there, then it just sits on the shelf and isn't used.
Well, we did find that young people used the careers libraries, even if they were also using My World of Work. So that also was perhaps a surprise.
I think what we found basically, there were sort of a group of young people who were being proactive. So they were using My World of Work, they were using the careers library, they were talking to the parents, they were talking to teachers, they were accessing the provision. And then there's a group who's really not doing anything. And if I could just correct something in the SDS submission, our research doesn't show that using My World of Work leads people to access other provision. We were not able to say which order people access provision in, so that was a misinterpretation.
Okay, thank you very much. Can I thank all the panel for coming along this morning? It's been most informative and useful for our discussions. However, as agreed earlier, we will now move into private session, and I close the public part of today's meeting. Thank you.